Our traditional Thursday upgrades video is back, and we are on the beautiful track in Brazil, Interlagos. Teams have brought different specs of cars. We do have some upgrades to go over as well, and what's going on around the grid with Max Verstappen and certain other drivers. We have news about that as well. This track always provides something special, and car configurations are very important here because there isn't a set way of setting up the car to have a perfect setup here in Brazil. It's either low or high downforce. It's tough to get a very in-between setup and still have a very successful race, especially because there's going to be some grid penalties and so forth. Right before getting started, wanted to thank you guys for the support. It means the world to me. Seeing you guys in the comments, being able to reply to you guys, and just overall what you guys do for me pushes me forward and makes me very thankful to have you. If you're new, go ahead and subscribe. It means a lot to the channel and me and shows that I'm doing a good job. But let's get started with Thursday's video. Right before getting into the actual rear wings themselves, Max Verstappen has confirmed that he will have a 5-place grid penalty on Sunday's race. He will be taking a new ICE. They do say all the other components should last to the end of the season. Is this a risk? I'm not sure. It's very tough to judge, but this is what they're going for. 5-place grid penalty for Max on qualifying in Saturday. There was also a AMUS ranking from 0 to 10 on the upgrades between every single car on this season. Aston Martin was a 2. I would honestly put them at a 1 or a 0. The car has not gone up. Sauber 3, fair enough. Alpine, maybe a 4 in my opinion. Red Bull should also be around the 4. Their upgrades haven't done much. Mercedes, I would actually probably bump them up a little higher. They've still made a better car throughout the season. Not by much, but maybe a 6. V-Carb should be much lower, around like a 3 or 4. Their car has not gone up. It's just been kind of in the middle. Williams should be around a 7 or 8. Haas should be a 9. McLaren and Ferrari to me should both be 10s. Both have had their amazing upgrades. Ferrari's had a little bit of mistakes, but they've made up through the season. So the ranking, it's pretty close, but I would change just a little bit. I'd love to hear your thoughts on in the comments below. Interesting ranking throughout the season. But with that out of the way, we can go over our traditional rear wings. Albert Fabrega is back. The GOAT was able to actually take them in the pit lane. Awesome pictures. Thank you for always providing them, Albert. They are amazing. Let's go over the specs. We have Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Aston Martin for this picture. The Red Bull itself is running a medium downforce rear wing. Wouldn't even classify it as medium high. It's right down the middle. Typically teams do not run this. In 2023, they ran a bit of a lower downforce spec. They had a very good top speed in comparison to the others. Their car overall was just magnificent. There is a couple of interesting aspects to this Red Bull car that we're going to go over, but the medium downforce rear wing is bolted onto that Red Bull car for this weekend, and same for the Mercedes. Mercedes is running a medium. Maybe you can classify it as a medium to high because the actual spoon itself, that bottom curve, is a bit lower than that of the Red Bull, but then also the upper plane itself is a bit smaller than the Red Bull is running. So it's also in that medium downforce spec of wing, but then the Ferrari is running a medium to high, mainly because the upper plane is bigger than that of both the Red Bull and the Mercedes. And this wing itself, we've seen it ran on medium to high downforce tracks like Barcelona. That's originally where this wing was brought. They also have those little blue dots to actually see where the airflow is going over that rear wing to see if it's correlating with exactly what they have on the computer. And Aston Martin is also running a medium to high downforce, the highest out of the 4 so far that we've seen. They did do this in 23 as well. They were one of those teams that didn't go for the top speed, but overall wanted the cornering in Sector 2 and Sector 1 to hopefully make up for time in Sector 3, because that's a big straight and top speed matters a lot, especially in this very high altitude. The next 4 teams we have after that is McLaren with a new rear wing that I will go over later, but this wing is very odd, different to everybody else's. I would classify this as a medium, and I'll go over exactly why when we're talking about the wing itself with some better pictures. The Alpine is running what I would say a medium to low. Not a big upper plane. The lower plane, the spoon itself, is not as curved as much as other teams. They're running a lower spec. We know why. Their engine is weak. They gotta somehow make up for that. Typically, they do it in the rear part of the car. The Williams car is running also about a medium to low, which has been pretty traditional on this Williams car and overall throughout the season. And the Racing Bulls is running almost a low. It's medium to low. So as you can see, the rear wings spec from medium to high to low. A very big range here in Brazil. It's typically what happens on this type of track. Setup is always very different for every team, depending on car and chassis. But then that brings us into the updates and what teams have brought here to kind of trying to configure the car. Some are upgrades, some are just configurations. As we can see on the Ferrari, they don't have that huge amount of cooling they had in Mexico. They've reverted back to the normal cooling grates they typically have. Only Mexico really runs those big, huge cooling grates. But we'll have to see how they adapt, especially if there's rain. Those cooling gills could be closed off even more because engine cooling should be much better in a colder weather GP. Depends on what's happening. Right now, the rain chances are actually very high. As for the Red Bull, they have done something that I didn't expect. I thought they would go back to that high engine cover, but no, they are actually running their typical high downforce engine cover with a wing that's around medium downforce. So maybe the car now is working on a better spec for here. I know in Vegas we will see the high gullies back again, but I do find it interesting that this is what they decided to do for the Brazil GP. And as we can see, that front wing they're running, it's still that high downforce spec for the front wing. We do know that Perez has actually been running a floor that's only been repaired and not an actual new floor because he's damaged the car so much. So they have to keep actually repairing that floor, which is just insane to think of. They are running the cooling grates that are exact same for Mexico, but they've never really ran too much cooling. The actual engine cover itself, though, is not the same one as Mexico because that bump right there between the H, O, and N on Honda is smaller than it was in Mexico. That was bigger to have better engine cooling towards the rear part of the car. And we can also see here that there is those little arrow dots on the Red Bull car as well to see how the flow goes over the rear wing. Seems like teams are testing it here to see what would be the better spec to have throughout that one practice session we have here in Brazil. Another interesting thing here to note for the Aston Martin team, they tested in Mexico the Imola floor, the Suzuka floor, the Hungary floor, and the Texas floor. And the conclusion they came to was that the Suzuka floor is the fastest floor that they have, which is just quite embarrassing on Alonso's 400 GP. So that's probably the spec of floor we're going to see here. Just insanity to think that's the version of the car we're going to see. Also with the old side pods is possible with a new front wing spec. So pretty crazy the downgrades that keep continuously happening for Aston Martin. Mercedes is also abandoning their upgrades for the rest of the season. They did have some parts planned. They do have some minor parts they might bring to test for 2025. But because of the crash that George Russell had in Mexico, they're getting too close to that budget cap. They were just able to bring the upgrades they had from Texas to Brazil. So that's all that I can inform you about Mercedes' upgrades for the rest of the season. This in Brazil, George Russell will run that exact same side pod and floor combination that Lewis had in Mexico. Let's see if that actually improves them. That's it for Mercedes on the upgrades. 25 will have to be a bigger season for them, as now they can't bring any more because of the budget cap. And lastly, the upgrade that we have here, as I said, McLaren have brought what might be their final upgrade of the season. They obviously had a big floor upgrade in Mexico, a lot of revised parts in Texas, and a new rear wing. And we know that all their rear wings have actually been banned with that little mini DRS effect that they've had. So this is actually a big step for them. They've needed this, and maybe it'll give them that pace that they need. Now looking at it, it's not too different on the upper plane. This has been their common look for the upper plane, but the lower plane now has that dip into the middle for a bit of that downforce, and that spoon eventually ends up actually straightening out, only being a dip towards the middle, where the focus of airflow is hitting that DRS activator right there and the bottom part of that spoon to coincide with the flow that goes over the rest of the car and to essentially give them that downforce towards the rear part of the car. They've always been revising what has been part of that beam wing and rear wing setup. They're the team that's brought the most combination of rear wings and beam wings in the season, so it's continued, and now Brazil has brought another spec. As I said, it's about medium to low, different to most teams, running something closer to that of the Racing Bulls. Let's see what it can provide for Brazil. But that's going to do it for the upgrades here in Brazil. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe. It would mean the world, and peace.